In our last section of Unit 2, we're going to talk about all the different types of pairs of angles that we are going to be using in geometry. So the first one we already talked about, that is adjacent angles. So you should already know that two adjacent angles are angles in the same plane with a common vertex and a common side, but no common interior points. So if we drew an example, it'll look something like this. We have an angle with a line in between. If we put some points on there, we could name it E, H, F, and G. And we could say that angle EHF is adjacent to angle FHG. Okay, it is next to FHG. That is what adjacent means. So our next type of angle pair is called vertical angles. Vertical angles are two non-adjacent angles formed by two intersecting lines. So if I draw an example of that, I have two intersecting lines, so something like this. And if I look at this angle right here and this angle right here, those would be examples of vertical angles. They're straight across from each other on those intersecting lines, and they are also congruent. So that's going to be very important in a lot of the stuff we are doing later down the road. So it's important to remember that vertical angles are always going to be congruent. Okay, then we also have a linear pair. And a linear pair are adjacent angles whose non-common sides are opposite rays. So that means that we are going to have two angles that are adjacent to each other on a straight line. So if we have angle 1 right here, angle 2 right here, they are adjacent, they are right next to each other, and they are on a straight line. Their non-common sides are opposite rays. That's what that part means, straight line. So linear pair, you think two angles on a straight line. Okay, our next one we have is complementary angles, and these are two angles whose measures have a sum of 90 degrees. And I'm going to draw two examples of this because we could have angles that look like this if we had 30 degrees over here and 60 degrees over here. That would be one example of complementary angles because they add up to 90. And now I also could have a pair of angles that are complementary and adjacent. They could be next to each other, 1 and 2. If this is 30 and this is 60, those are another example of complementary angles. So they can be adjacent, they could not be adjacent. So long as they add up to 90, they're complementary. Okay, so our next one is supplementary. And very similar to complementary, except this one is 180 degrees. So if I have my first example of complementary, if I had an angle that was 20 degrees, and an angle that was 150 degrees, those two angles would be supplementary because they add to 180. Now I also could have angles that form a linear pair and are supplementary. So if this one was 140 degrees, this was 40 degrees, they would be a linear pair and supplementary. Okay, so those are the important angle pairs that we are going to talk about for now. Let's look at some examples. Our first example says identify each pair of angles as adjacent, vertical, complementary, supplementary, and or as a linear pair. So let's start with angles 1 and angle 2. Angle 1 and 2 are right here. And right away, I know these two angles share a common side and vertex, so those are adjacent. They do not add up to 90 or 180, so that rules those out. And if they're adjacent, they're not vertical. So that is my only answer for number 1. Now, if I look at number 1 and 4, I'm looking at these angles right here, 1 and 4. Well, if I look at those lines, I notice that they meet at two intersecting lines. Angle 1 and 4 are straight across from each other on those two intersecting lines. So that tells me they are vertical angles. If they are vertical, they can't be adjacent. And I don't know anything about their angle measures, so I don't know if they're complementary, supplementary, or they're definitely not a linear pair because they're not on a straight line. Okay, so let's look at number 3. Angle 3 and angle 4. So I'm going to get that in the red pen. 3 and angle 4 are right here. Got this angle and this angle. Now 3 and 4, those are adjacent, and they also make a right angle, so they are complementary. If they're complementary, they are not a linear pair or supplementary, and if they're adjacent, they're not vertical. So those are my only two for that one. Then my last question, number 4, angle 1 and 5. If I do this one in the blue pen, we have angle 1 right here, angle 5 over on this side. Those create a straight line, so they are a linear pair. They're also supplementary because if they're a linear pair, that means they add up to 180. So supplementary as well. And then if they are a linear pair, they are also adjacent to each other. So I have 3 answers for number 4. Okay, let's look at 5 and 6 next. Number 5 is asking us to find the value of x. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at these angles and see what relationship they have to each other. Well, my angles here are straight across from each other. That means they are vertical angles. And vertical angles, I just learned, were congruent to each other. So I can set 5x equal to x plus 16. And I can solve. Bring my x to the other side. Get 4x equals 16. My x equals 4. So that is my answer for number 5. For number 6, I have a straight line and 2 angles that make up that straight line. I just learned that those 2 angles are going to add up to 180. So if I add those 2 pieces together, 7x plus 10 plus 3x, I know I can set that equal to 180 degrees. Then I can combine my like terms. Move that 10 over to the other side. And divide by 10. Okay, x equals 17. Okay, we've got one more. Number 7. This box in the corner tells me right away that I have a 90-degree angle. So if I add up these 2 pieces of my 90-degree angle, I'd get 4x plus 3 plus x minus 8, and I can set that equal to 90 degrees. When I add my like terms, I get 5x minus 5 equals 90. Add 5x equals 95. I get x is equal to 19.